Labour gain in Hitchin. We have news here of a Labour gain. Here are the likely majority figures at the moment. Labour 28, the possible majority. Here is news of a Labour gain in Hitchin. Shirley Williams, well-known member of the Labour Party, is in.
About a 6% swing in Hitchin.
Former secretary of the Fabian Society and the daughter of Vera Brittain.
A new town developing in that constituency has made it better and better territory for Labour over the last 2 elections.
Harold Wilson made a big speech there, if I
Big
remember
increase,
rightly.
12,000 in the electorate.
Here's Leighton in with Mr. Sorensen, well-known member of the Labour Party, holding Leighton for Labour.
A very safe seat.
We have Hendon North, an equally safe, oh, well, I did nearly say it, Conservative seat, but it's not a very big majority. Ian or Ewing, ex-BBC, ex-Conservative government, has held the seat for Conservatives.
Fairly big swing to Labour there.
Here's Newcastle on Tyne West, which Mr. Popplewell, Ernest Popplewell, has held on to for Labour. In Widnes, in Lancashire, we have Mr. McCull, the Labour victory, no change there.
4.8% swing there.
A similar Labour victory, or holding on, in Glasgow Bridgeton for Mr. Bennett. Wakefield in Yorkshire, Labour has held, there's no change. We have news of Liverpool Wavertree, which the Conservatives have held, there's no change at Liverpool Wavertree.
John Tilney, an Under-Secretary in the Commonwealth Relations
But a very big swing to Labour there, a 9% swing as in the other Merseyside places.
Now, we have news of events down in Bath in the West Country. So, no, Bath or Bob? Bob.
Let's look now at the forecast board, which is still pointing, as you'll see, to a likely Labour majority in the bottom line of 28 seats. The national swing is still around 4.2. It's varied enormously more this time than in most previous elections. We're getting far more on either side of that, but nonetheless it's settling in pretty firmly at a point where we can be sure that Labour is going to win. I'd add to this, I think, that the prospect of the third government in this century of the left taking power with a working majority is now very clear indeed.
We have news of Mr. Edward Heath is safely back in Bexley for the Conservatives.
Swing of about 4% in Bexley, I guess.
This is the one the Conservatives were a bit worried about. Mr. Heath, of course, was the anchor man, the Richard Dimbleby of the Conservative election programmes.
Do you mind? Here is the news of Hendon South. Sir Hugh Lucas Tooth, well-known Conservatives, held the seat for the Conservatives. I'm sorry, I got Bob and the Bath mixed up just now. We now take. Things are coming in thick and fast. Plymouth Sutton. There's a very, very close thing in Plymouth Sutton, which the Conservatives have just held.
It was a seat that Labour would have done very well to win, but they have held it. The Conservatives have held it, and they held Devonport by even more.
Labour Co-op have Wood Green in London in the shape of Mrs. Butler. There's no change there.
At 5.3% swing in Wood Green.
From the University City of Cambridge comes news that it's remaining pale blue. The Conservatives are still holding Cambridge.
By a very big drop in majority.
Here's the other one that David was expecting to go in London, but that's Sir Hugh Linstead, who's lost Putney. He was the Conservative MP for Putney for some time, he's lost it by that.
He even held Putney in 45.
Yeah.
It's really rather a remarkable result and does represent a fairly big swing.
Here's West Houghton, where Labour have the seat with a very comfortable majority, no change there. In Buckinghamshire, the land of the ducks, we can take Aylesbury, where the Conservatives have no change and have held the seat.
But a very high Liberal vote there.
What about Plymouth Devonport? Miss Vickers, Joan Vickers, well-known Conservative, has held Dockland and Naval Land in Plymouth.
Keeping the southwest swing there down to 2.4%.
Never mind the figure suddenly disappearing. What shall we take now?
West Ham
Here's
North.
West Ham North, which Labour have held. No change there. Here
Liberal
is
came second, the Conservative third in West Ham North.
Swansea West. This is a repeat of the figures we gave you earlier, a Labour gain.
That's your reason.
That's, yes. We can take Mr. MacLeod, who is safely back into business.
One of the more controversial members of the Conservative Party.
But
he must be having
swing
thoughts of his
about
own that night.
Nevertheless, please, a Tory is out in Dulwich.
That's a fairly big swing in a marginal that was expected to go on the sort of current
That's
form.
Mr. Stevens, the present Conservative candidate. The previous MP, Robert Jenkins, wasn't standing.
Brighouse has gone Labour. Here's a small majority.
That's Michael Shaw. He won it at the by-election just after the last election. It's this thing a seesaw to and fro. It was liable to go Labour if there's any swing to the left.
had the smallest Labour majority in the last election, only 40 votes.
Here's Tynemouth in. Dame Irene Ward, a very famous Conservative member, who's held Tynemouth.
With a 5.7% swing to the Conservative, to Labour in Tynemouth.
We have Gateshead West, which Labour have held, with Mr. Randall. No surprises there. Here's Worcester, which the Conservatives have held. No change out there in the Apple land.
The Liberals have dropped back quite a lot there. Peter Walker, a very vigorous Conservative member, back in Worcester.
News that Labour have kept Woodside.
That was the seat they won in a by-election in November 1962.
That's Mr. Carmichael, the man who did it.
It's a fairly good result for Labour.
Mr. Carmichael, who won it at the by-election.
Here's Devizes, where the man reputed to be the richest of all MPs has held the seat with the Conservatives. There's no change there.
That actually, I think, is his son. That's Charles Morrison, Richard.
I'm sorry, I stand corrected. London Fulham. Labour have London Fulham. There's no change there.
Michael Stewart will be almost certainly housing minister if there's to be a Wilson government.
I see Sir Keith Joseph, and I think he's trying to talk to Robin Day. So, Robin, we'll join you now.
Sir Keith, with the Conservative having lost 34 seats, do you now accept the fact there's going to be a Wilson government?
No, I haven't been following the figures in sufficient detail. My own count has only just been finished.
Well, our experts here suggest there's practically no doubt whatever that there will be a Labour government. What is your comment on that, assuming it to be true?
Assuming it to be true, it's a fact. There's no comment on it. But I thought there were a lot of regional swings, differentials going on.
Let me ask you something which is not hypothetical, Sir Keith. Are you ashamed of the Smithick result? I use that word because Mr. Ray Gunter said any good Conservative, decent Conservative, should be ashamed of the result at Smithick, in which Mr. Patrick Gordon Walker lost his seat.
He lost his seat,
yes, he did.
There's been some confusion in the stories I've heard.
He lost it, and Mr. Peter Griffiths won it. What is your comment as a Conservative?
The Tory party has dissociated itself from any use of racial... Of course it has.
Sir Keith, if the Conservatives lose this election, do you expect them to choose a new leader fairly soon?
Good Lord, no.
Do you think there have been mistakes in the Conservative campaign? Or
no.
Why do you think the country has appeared to have turned against you in the way it has? So far.
If it has, of course, it's a remarkable diminution. It's a remarkable drop in the anti-government swing of only a few months ago.
There seem to be a number of strong votes against ministers. Mr. Bevins has lost his seat, Mr. Geoffrey Rippon has lost his seat, and Mr. Henry Brooks' majority in Hampstead is down to just over the 1,000 mark, which is a tremendous drop. Would you care to comment on that?
Oh, I think one would have to look at movements of population and that sort of thing before drawing any personal conclusions. I doubt very much such personal conclusions.
May I end by asking you to comment on your own results, Sir Keith, which perhaps gives you more pleasure?
I'm well satisfied.
Would you remind us of the figures, because I haven't seen them myself on the screen yet?
About 8,300.
Thank you very much, Sir Keith Joseph.
Thank you.
Now, I think we better have a quick look at the state of the parties again, don't you? This is the situation at 12:34. Labour lead over Conservative is 47. 248 results declared, 382 to come. And move to the actual state of the parties. The Conservatives, the 100 seats, have gained 3 and have lost 34. Labour, with 147, have gained 35 and lost 3. The Liberals have gained 1 and lost 1. Wilsden has gone Labour.
That's
about a 4% swing there.
That's Mr. Skeet, who won it off Labour in 1959. He's a New Zealand barrister.
We have news that Mr. Maudling has won and is in.
That's in Barnet, and that's his
5% swing there. Sir Keith Joseph actually had the lowest swing against him of any minister, to comment on his thing last now. Only 3.7% against him in North East Leeds.
Labour's captured another seat.
That's Chatham.
Rochester and Chatham. That's Julian Critchley, who held that seat by putting out a majority. Won it in 59. Now he's lost it. Mr. Critchley.
Only 2% swing there. Much below
Mr.
average.
Galbraith is back safely for the Conservatives.
That's a safe seat. That's Mr. Galbraith, who resigned over the time of the Bassel affair. Was completely exonerated and is now back in the government at the Ministry of Transport, number 2 there.
Here's Sunderland, where the Tory is out.
That's Mr. Paul Williams, who's lost South Sunderland. He won it at the by-election in 53, but it's been seesawing around. He held it by under 1,000 at the last election.
Labour have a gain in the north. Well, we did have, but it suddenly vanished. I expect it means what it says.
Here is Rochdale, where the Liberal had hoped to get somewhere, and they've dropped back quite a way.
Incidentally, while we have a moment to tell you, those who haven't forgotten what's going on in Russia, Mr. Brezhnev is the new party leader in Russia, and Mr. Kosygin is the new chairman of the Council of Ministers, so it is certainly farewell, Mr. Khrushchev. Let us now proceed with our own affairs. Mitcham is in. Now, the Conservatives have held Mitcham.
With a 4.9% swing to Labour in Mitcham, 79% poll.
Robert Carr, the Secretary of Technical Cooperation. Here's another Labour game.
Preston South, is it not?
This is the one at Kingston on Hull North.
Yes.
Michael Coulson, who won this seat, who held this seat in 1959. This has been Conservative ever since 1950, but it was held by a very narrow majority last time, I presume for boundary reasons.
We have Sheffield Hillsborough, Labour Co-op. This is Mr. George Darling, is it not?
This is George
Yes.
Darling.
Very safe seat.
In Bootle, Labour have held the seat, there's no change. In Merthyr Tydfil, Labour, needless to say, have held the seat with no change. We have Portsmouth South, Sir Hugh Lucas, yes, who is Sir Jocelyn Lucas, sorry, the sitting member, has held the seat for the Conservatives.
There's a recount in the other Portsmouth seat, in Portsmouth West, I believe.
Yep. In Birmingham Small Heath, Labour have held the seat.
With a considerable increase on their majority in the by-election 5 years ago.
Oh, here's a very important
news of
result.
Mr.
Anthony Barber, the Minister of Health, beaten at Doncaster. He won it in 1951. This is a seesaw seat, needed a 3.5% swing to get him out. He's the third senior minister, the second cabinet minister to lose his seat tonight.
A 5% swing, rather less than the public opinion poll, the sensational public opinion poll there forecast.
Here's Liverpool Garston, which the Conservatives have held.
With a much reduced majority in this very safe thing.
Here's a Midland Tory win, which somebody will identify.
This is Brierley Hill.
Brierley Hill.
Well, this is astonishing. He's put up his. This is Mr. John Talbot, who won the seat in '59 with a majority of just over 4,000. He's put up his majority. This confirms the quite different trend in the Midlands, David.
It's the West Midlands, really, not the Midlands, because 2 seats have been lost in Nottingham. It's the Birmingham area, the Black Country, that is diverging from the national pattern. However, Labour has picked up 2 seats in that area.
Swansea East, it's Labour again. Mr. Neil McBride, there's no change there. Not surprising, perhaps. Here's Edinburgh North, which this is Lord Dalkeith, is it not? Has held it for the Conservatives.
Yeah.
With a 6% swing to Labour, which must comfort them since they do have 2 marginals in the middle of Edinburgh.
Let's take Sevenoaks in Kent, Mr. Rogers, who has held the seat for the Conservatives down there. It must not be called...
A 20% Liberal vote in this next-door seat to Orpington.
Now,
Again, must encourage those awaiting the Orpington result.
Here, on the other hand, is a Labour gain in the same West Midlands area. This is Mr. Philip Hocking, who won the Coventry South seat in 1959. He's now lost it. I think it's fair to say this was a Labour seat between 45 and 59. It's very marginal.
3% swing, much bigger than the average.
We'll now go to Huyton in Cheshire, where Mr. Harold Wilson is going to talk to us.
5. Mr. Wilson, if I may congratulate you on your own remarkable majority here at Huyton. What do you feel about the national situation at the moment?
First, I feel very pleased with having trebled the majority in Huyton. So far as the national situation is concerned, I think I wouldn't go further than to say the results are moderately encouraging.
Well, do you feel like a Prime Minister?
Quite honestly, I feel like a dream.
Has anything about the results so far that surprised you?
Surprised me, no. I think many of the marginals that we hoped we were going to win, we have in fact won. 1 or 2 results have shocked me.
Which particularly?
Well, Smethwick particularly. Because Smethwick is completely contrary to the national swing, and I think all of us know why it was contrary to the national swing. It was the result of a campaign being conducted in a way which I can only regard as a disgraceful exception to the general trend of British politics for the last 100 years. And I think it will reflect not only on those who have conducted it in this way, but I'm afraid for quite a long time on the name of Smethwick, which I'm afraid may become internationally recognized as a result of this election.
Let me push you a bit harder on this, only moderately encouraging, Mr. Wilson. Everybody agrees it's now 20 to 30, your majority. Aren't you feeling very pleased indeed?
You see, I think so far we have won, 150 seats or so. When we have won 316, I think we may now than say that we have a majority in the House of Commons. But there are a lot of votes still to be counted.
Yes, but the marginals are going very well in your
Yes,
favour.
they are, yeah.
Do you expect to be in a position to claim victory tonight?
Rather an American phrase, isn't it? And we've been reminded so often this is not an American election. I would feel that when we find that, if we do, as I hope we shall, that we have 316 seats, that will be the moment to claim victory, unless, of course, the other side, in the American term, concede it.
Well, I'm going to assume that you'll be Prime Minister tomorrow, and therefore ask you this question. Mr. Patrick Gordon Walker, would you appoint him to your cabinet outside the House?
The question is really, first it depends on whether we win and whether I am asked to form an administration. And then the question of the names that it would be my duty in those circumstances to submit to the Queen, I don't think I can discuss tonight. But let me say this, that I don't regard the result of Smethwick in any way affecting my attitude to the position of Patrick Gordon Walker in a Labour government.
Well, may I change the subject, Mr. Wilson? What is your view, your immediate reaction to the news that Mr. Khrushchev has been retired?
We haven't enough about it yet to be able to form a view, and I've been very much involved with the Count and with other things this evening, so that I haven't even read what has been said in Moscow. I understand, am I right, that Mr. Kosygin has succeeded him. Mr. Kosygin I know very well. I've met him and had many discussions with him on my last 2 visits to Moscow and on other occasions. He's certainly very tough, very able, very efficient. He is a great specialist in matters affecting industrial development. Though, of course, like all the first deputy premiers of the Soviet Union, he has a completely free-ranging right to deal with all matters of policy. I argued with him for 2 hours about disarmament. At a dinner at the British Embassy last year, I found he was at least as fully informed on that question as any of his colleagues, even the Foreign Minister.
You've often in the past, Mr. Wilson, expressed your admiration for many of Mr. Khrushchev's qualities. What are your feelings on hearing that he has been retired?
Well, I think if it has anything to do with ill health, as it may have been, I think all of us will be sorry. He has been a bit under the weather as a result of some of his arduous tours abroad. If that is the reason, naturally everyone will be sorry. If he has been deposed as a result of some palace revolution in the Kremlin or some democratic vote in the Council of Ministers, I think we'd want to know much more about the reasons.
You are in favour of meeting the leaders of the world leaders meeting together very often, Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
And you've been questioned in this campaign about when you would go to Washington to see President Johnson, assuming both won, and you've said in a few weeks. Would you now regard it as higher priority to go to Moscow than to Washington?
When I became leader of the party, I went to Washington first, despite the immediate invitation I had from Moscow. And I think it's terribly important to sort out some of the major questions of the alliance, so far as defence and foreign policy are concerned, and this means visiting Washington. I hope after that one might be able to see the subjects on which fruitful discussions with Moscow could be conducted, and I would hope that disarmament was one of the leading issues one could discuss.
So I'd like to know if you're finding this rather tense evening a strain. Do you plan to sit up and see it through and hear all the results tonight?
I shall probably sit up a little while, yes. First, as soon as this interview is over, I go to the headquarters of my party in Huyton, because I owe a very deep debt of thanks to those who put me here, not least because, of course, through my nationwide campaign, I haven't spent as much time in Huyton as I would have liked.
Can I ask you whether you think you'll come back on the television tonight to claim victory?
I wouldn't like to make any forecast. I don't think enough seats will have been counted to enable us to see 316 Labour seats.
We'll wait and see, Mr. Wilson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Back in London, we go to Bob Mackenzie.
Well, in that interview, Mr. Wilson was being constitutionally correct, of course, in not claiming anything until the 316 seats are in, and that is the right way to do it. On the other hand, watching it, one had every feeling that he was thinking about what he does next. We're in a rather remarkable situation in which two of the leading figures of the Western world are about to change places. Mr. Khrushchev has left power, and we're now seeing a transfer of power almost certainly in this country. I can't think of this occurring within a situation of this kind within a matter of 48 hours. Could we look now at the state of the party's position? Labour's lead 47. It may not stay that right till the end, because the results to come in later and tomorrow are in rural areas and so on.
We've news at Orpington. Let's go down there, quick.
This is Roderick McFark at Orpington, where the Liberals won their sensational by-election victory over the Conservatives in 1962. And the Deputy Acting Returning Officer, Mr. King, is just going to announce the result.
Orpington. The result. Eric Reginald Lubbock, 22,637 votes.
Liberal.
22,637. Norris Dewar McWhirter, 19,000.
Liberal have retained the seat. Eric Lubbock has retained the seat for the Liberal Party here by at least about 2,000 votes. He's looking very happy and a tremendous amount of applause going on.
Eric Lubbock back in Orpington with the Liberals. Comments?
Well, this is very good news for the Liberals. They've lost one seat so far in Bolton. They may well lose another in Huddersfield. But this is one of they've now held the two other tricky seats, North Devon and Orpington, and they've still got a chance of picking up 2 or 3 others.
They have been doing well this evening. They've been increasing their vote much more often than they've been reducing it, and they have, in fact, got up to second place in 5 seats where they were third before. They've only dropped down in 1.
We have news that Mr. George Wigg has remained, held his seat.
George Wigg, the scourge of the government on defence, and also the man who managed Harold Wilson's campaign for the party leadership.
4% swing in that West Midlands seat, way above average for George Wigg.
Dennis Healy is back in Leeds East for Labour.
Almost certain to be a Minister of Defence in a Wilson government.
4% swing.
Here's the North Fylde result. The Conservatives have held North Fylde. There's no change. Richard Crossman is back in the House. He's held his seat. That's not, I think, a surprise.
No, not at all. He's back in Coventry.
I have news that there is a recount at Preston North. That's
Richard Crossman, of course,
seat.
will certainly be in a Labour government.
I was saying, there's a recount at Preston North. Here's the result from Newport. Sir Frank Susskiss for Labour, one of the law officers, has held the seat. Former law officers, I should have said, has held the seat. There's another foot in. This is Michael with a handsome majority.
Ebervale,
of course.
Seat.
Almost as big as the now in Bevan had in that seat in 1959.
Here's Chippenham, Wiltshire Way.
A very good result for the Liberals. They've almost held the position they had in the by-election.
We have a Birmingham Tory out.
That's the Yardley result. I think that's the 3rd marginal in Birmingham, which the Conservatives have lost. On the other hand, they've gained one in the remaining margin.
That's Mr. Leonard Cleaver, who won the seat off Labour in 1959 by a majority of about 1,300, and he's now just lost it by not very much.
Mr. Pavitt has held Labour as a Labour co-op candidate. Willesden West in London, no change there. The Conservatives have Sheffield Healy. This is a no change.
But a considerable reduction in majority there against Sir Peter Roberts.
The well-known Labour man, Mr. Bottomley, in Middlesbrough East, who's held the seat for Labour very comfortably.
5% swing there.
Oldbury and Hales Owen, we have as a Labour seat, a fairly close thing, but Labour have held the seat.
John Horner of the Fire Brigades Union, that is, now in Parliament.
Former communist who resigned from the Communist Party at the time of Suez.
Now, having had the Orpington result with its good news for the Liberals, Robin Day is now able to talk to the Liberal Party leader, Joe Grimond.
Well, Mr. Grimond, the Orpington result was a slap in the eye for practically every pollster and pundit around, wasn't it?
It was indeed. Not entirely unexpected to us. We had an absolutely first-class candidate, of course, who had established himself as being a very good constituency member, and in spite of the Conservatives throwing everything they had into the seat, he has held it by a comfortable majority. I congratulate him.
Do you have any... Would you care to give a forecast of how many seats you think you'll get in the next Parliament, judging by the way you've done so far in all the results?
I wouldn't give an exact forecast. We ought to pick up 1 or 2 more in the West Country, but we haven't had any results now from places like the north of Scotland or from Wales, which are other hopeful areas for us.
Mr. Grimond, would you object if I turned your mind to the east for a moment? What's your reaction to the news that Mr. Khrushchev has been relieved of his post, and the fact that a new Prime Minister will be coming in Britain probably as well?
As far as Russia is concerned, it looks as though the people who are taking on were very much in Mr. Khrushchev's way of thinking, and if his policies are continued, I don't see it will make much difference. I think there will be regret that Mr. Khrushchev has had to go, if it is through ill health, because although no doubt there were deep disagreements with him, he at least turned Russia to a much more peaceful road than that of Stalin.
Mr. Grimond, is there any particular result, going back to our own election, which you would like to comment on or refer to of any of the parties?
Well, of course, North Devon was a wonderful result for us, and certainly gives us very great hope all through the West.
Do you have any comment on the Smithwick result? When Mr.
Indeed,
Gordon
I do. I think it's a disgraceful result. I'm very sorry. I've sent a telegram to Patrick Gordon Walker, and that he should be put out on a racial issue is, I think, a blot on the whole election.
Mr. Grimond, thank you.
Let us now go to Bob Mackenzie and the state of the parties. Bob?
Here's the Labour lead over the Conservatives, now 55. They're running very strongly indeed. It's unlikely to be the size of their majority tomorrow because of the fact that they'll be not doing quite so well in the rural areas reporting tomorrow. But we're still looking toward a 29 or 30 Labour majority when it's all over. You can see how seats have been changing hands. Remember I said earlier in the evening that upper right-hand corner is all important. I said when the Tories lose 40, they're in desperate trouble. If they lose 45, their majority is virtually gone. It's quite clear that's going to happen, as it has been evident for some time. And by the way, the public opinion polls, after all, aren't doing too badly. I've been looking up what they said. National opinion polls talked of a 3 3/4% swing to Labour, Gallup a 4% swing. It's actually running at the moment at 4.2. So we were taking the mickey out of them earlier, but they're doing really quite well so far.
There's news that Mr. Anthony Nutting has not succeeded in getting his seat at Oldham East.
Mr. Nutting, of course, resigned from the Eden government at the time of Suez. He's now trying to get back into politics.
He kept the swing down to 3% in this seat that the Conservatives actually lost in 1959.
London Battersea North, Mr. Jay, well-known Labour figure, has held the seat for Labour.
Douglas Jay, Labour's main spokesman on trade, bound to be in the Wilson cabinet, I would have thought.
Lost Liberal and Communist deposits.
Harrow Central, which the Conservatives have held, there's no change there. We have Dame Patricia Hornsby-Smith, well-known Conservative, former junior minister, back in Chislehurst, no change to the Conservatives there.
5% swing in Chislehurst.
London Stepney has, as you might expect, been held by Labour.
Peter Shaw is the former research secretary of the Labour Party, will certainly have an important post in a Labour government, I should think.
Sir Winston Churchill's old seat, Wanstead and Woodford, the Conservatives have held.
A 6% swing to the Labour Party there, not much different from the national average, which may be a blow to those who believe in a personal vote.
Dunfermline Boroughs up in Scotland, Labour, no change. Farnham in Surrey, Sir Godfrey Nicholson has held the seat for the Conservatives. In comes Leeds North West, Mr. Donald Cabery. Conservatives, no change there. Majority nearly 11,000. We can take Croydon North West, which is in for the Conservatives, no change. Here is Birkenhead, Mr. Dell, Labour, 23,000, nearly 24,000, no change there.
A new member, lower swing than in other Wirral seats, other Merseyside seats.
Birmingham Hall Green, the Conservatives have held.
4.4% swing against Mr. Aubrey Jones, the former Conservative minister.
West Ham South, back in London again, held by Labour, expectedly. No comments. Kensington South, equally probably, held by the Conservatives.
The Liberals dropped back to third place, having been second in 1959.
Now then, there should now be some news of swing, so we'll join Bob up at the indicator.
Well, remember earlier I said if 4 people in every 100 were to change sides compared to how they voted in 1959, there would be a Labour government. It looks very much like that now. It's settling in around 4.2. In fact, there's been a tremendous amount of wobbling compared to many elections, big swing variations, enormous difference coming in all through the evening. But it is settling down now in a quite conclusive way here. Let me remind you, however, this is a Labour lead over the Conservatives. And the number of Liberals could have some effect on this. It's unlikely the number of Liberals will be very different from what it was in the last House. But at the moment, it's a Labour overall majority of something in the vicinity of 20, which from many points of view is an ideal-sized majority, since it's not likely to get out of hand. But that's the position as of now.
Here's news of the Liberals out.
This is Donald Wade. Remember we were talking about the Liberal-Conservative pact in Bolton. There was the same one in Huddersfield. It's been broken, so Mr. Wade this time had a Conservative standing against him, and he's done, if he comes second, he's done, I thought, quite well.
I think he was third, and I think this Labour majority of 1,200 is over the Conservatives in Huddersfield West.
Here's the result from Wigan. which Labour has held with no change. Mr. Fitch, that's not surprising, perhaps.
I'm sorry, I just made a mistake. Mr. Wade was second in Huddersfield.
Good for you. Nottingham North, Labour no change. They've held the seat.
Considerably increased majority.
We have Sheffield Park, once again, no change there by Labour.
Fred is a dark horse for a Labour government.
Ilford North, held by Mr. Iremonger, Conservative candidate, no change there.
The big Liberal vote there.
In Northampton, Mr. Paget, well-known Labour Member of Parliament, has held the seat. There's no change.
But a rather smaller than average swing there.
In Rowley Regis and Tipton, there's no change. Labour have held the seat. Birmingham Northfield, Labour have held no change in that branch of Birmingham.
That must be a relief to them. They only held it by 1,300, and the way the West Midlands has been going, it wasn't quite certain what would happen in Northfield.
St Albans, Mr. Goodhue has held the seat for the Conservatives.
With any of
as has Mr. Reader Harris in Heston and Isleworth. Ilford South, we have the Conservatives holding the seat, not with a very large majority. In Southend West, the Conservatives have held the seat for Mr. Channon.
But the Liberals came easily second. Labour was a fairly bad third in Southend West.
That's young Mr. Hoyer Miller, is it not? Yes. In Hove, predictably perhaps, the Conservatives have held the seat. Edinburgh Central. Labour have held Edinburgh Central against the Conservatives.
This was a seat that was thought might go over to the Conservatives through population movements in that part of Edinburgh.
Richmond Surrey, Mr. Anthony Royal has held the seat for the Conservatives.
With a reduced majority.
Fine. Well, we're leaving Richmond Surrey. That's the town with the best local newspaper in the country. We now have somewhere to go. Down west in Cardiff, there is some sort of jollification. No, discussion by the look of it going on. Let us go down there and join them.
Well, we are in the club of the Overseas League in Cardiff, the Royal Overseas League, where we've got a group of Cardiff citizens assembled, and we're going to ask them about the results so far. Now, what is your reaction, sir, to the results so far? What do you feel? Are Labour in?
Well, I think the country's definitely on the move. It's still too early to say who's going to win, I think.
How do you feel about it? Are you pleased or sorry?
I don't mind yet. I think this is the most interesting election which has taken place in this country since the war. And it's indeed fascinating to see the way in which people are voting at the moment.
What about you, madam? Are you pleased or sorry at this result?
Yes, I'm very pleased at the result. I think Labour is going to win, and it's
good for
the country all over.
What about you, madam?
Well, I'm not at all surprised at the results, and now...
Why aren't you surprised?
Well, this is what I really expected. And I hope now that they're going to prove and do all they've said they're going to do.
Now, in this division of Cardiff South East, we have Dexter here, the England cricket captain. He's only got a very small majority to wipe out, 800. Do you think he'll do it in the teeth of this swing to Labour over the rest of the country?
Well, I don't think I can possibly say I'm not adequate.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel he'll do it, ma'am?
Oh, yes, I definitely think he will get in.
Why?
Well, for the simple reason, we've heard the word change going on. Well, I think if we put Dexter in, we're putting young blood into Parliament.
Yeah, but has this made a difference in the teeth of the swing in the rest of the country? After all, the votes have already gone.
Yes, the votes are already gone. But if he does get in, I think he's made up his mind that he is going to become an MP and not a cricketer.
Thank you very much indeed. Trevor Philbott in Cardiff.
A quick look in London at the state of the parties from Bob Mackenzie.
We've now passed the halfway mark. You'll note that the bottom two lines that 320 results are in, 310 to come, with Labour a commanding lead, not one that's likely to represent their final majority, because the third of the results to come tomorrow will be many rural and other results where they won't do quite as well. Turning to the next party board, you'll note now the Conservative losses at 44, virtually wiping out their majority, whatever now happens. And there's no doubt at all that figure is going to go far above 50, 60, somewhere up there.
Here's a happy picture of Mr. Charles Longbottom, who has succeeded in holding the York seat for the Tories.
This is very good news for the Conservatives, one ray of light, because it only needed a swing of under 3.5%, under the national average. He's held it quite comfortably. Mr. Longbottom is PPS to Ian MacLeod.
About a 2% swing in York.
Mr. Stephen McCadden is back for the Conservatives in Southend East. There's no change there. Mr. Francis Noel Baker, a well-known Member of Parliament, has held Swindon for Labour, no change there. In Dorking, in the heart of lovely Surrey, the Conservatives have held the seat, as one would expect them to. Going to Aberdeen South, Lady Tweedsmuir has held the seat there for the Conservatives.
She's one of the under-secretaries of the Scottish office.
Sutton Coldfield, where the Conservatives are holding the seat with a comfortable majority. R1, a Labour Scot holds on.
I'm almost sure it's Gregor Mackenzie who's held on to Rutherglen. Remember they won it at the by-election earlier this year, at the same time as the Devizes by-election. Yes, it is.
Foreign Office man back, must be sure
Thomas.
Peter Thomas, yes.
He's held Conway.
That means he's held that for the Conservatives.
Yes.
In Twickenham, Middlesex, Mr. Gresham Cook for the Conservatives has held the seat.
And the nuclear disarmament candidate got 1,000 votes and lost his deposit.
You would have thought, wouldn't you, by now, that it was quite wet enough with the rain going on for people not to want to try and destroy Trafalgar Square. But have a look at the scene. Our cameras are down there, and there are those who find a jolly evening, 1 o'clock in the morning, and if the rain isn't enough, well, the next best thing is to get into the fountain. The interesting thing is that I've been watching this out of the corner of my eye for the last minute, and so far, the police have made no effort to intervene at all. Whether they feel it would be a political gesture if they did, or whether it's too wet for them, I don't know. Anyway, we are back, and we join Robin Day.
And with me is Mr. Geoffrey Rippon, who lost Norwich South, and you, Mr. Rippon, are the first defeated minister we've seen this evening. But you nearly won it, didn't you?
Well, it was a very close thing, but the point is I didn't win it.
No, but your majority was 611, I think, wasn't it?
It was the Labour majority, 611.
The majority against you, yes. Well, that was, you nearly did it. Would you care to comment on the trend as you see it at the moment? Nobody here is in any doubt whatever that Mr. Wilson will form the next government.
Well, from the figures that have so far been presented, it looks as if the Labour Party is doing very well, but I think you're in a better position to comment with all your battery of experts around you than I am about the likely result following the various swings that have taken place.
Well, taking the result as we've seen them so far, do you think that the Conservative Party made any serious mistakes in its campaign or was up against the general trend?
I think we were up against the general trend. I think we put the issues as fairly and as clearly as we could before the country, and one issue in particular, defence, which was a major issue, I think we rightly stressed, but I'm afraid the public were probably more interested in domestic issues.
Do you have any comment on that? I must round off now, Mr. Rippon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have news of Mr. George Brown is back in Belper, so he's in Parliament.
But only a very small swing to Labour. They're only about a little over 1%.
If there's to be a Labour government, of course, Mr. Brown will is tipped to take over his new job of Minister of Economic Affairs.
Here's Hornchurch, which the Conservatives have just held, although it's on the district line, like Uxbridge and Brentford and Chiswick, same thing.
This is a very good result for them. It's one of the seats that should have gone, and it may well be that Mr. Williams will blame the strikers for his defeat.
Now London, Stoke Newington and Hackney North. Mr. Weitzman has held this for Labour, very comfortably, as was expected, I think. In Lady Gammons, the widow of a former Conservative minister, has held Hornsey for the Conservatives, no change there.
It can't have been a recount either, despite what was said earlier.
No. In Dumfriesshire, we have the Conservatives in the shape of Mr. Munro. There's no change up there.
That's an improvement on the by-election when they nearly lost Dumfriesshire.
There's Shipley, where the Conservatives have held the seat against all comers. Here is Harwich, just in. Conservative and National Liberal has held the seat, Mr. Ridsdale.
Julian Ridsdale's the Under-Secretary of State for Air in the reorganised Ministry of Defence.
Back again for a moment to our delicious cooling pictures in Trafalgar Square, giving all the politicians time to cool off. As you will see, there's no... I'm very puzzled why there's no intervention, because the LCCs and Westminster are very hot under the collar about people who mess about in the fountains in Trafalgar Square. Maybe 1 o'clock in the morning on election night is considered fair game. It's not unlike one of those sort of Brock's benefit firework displays, so this one's for free. Well, there we are. We'd better leave Trafalgar Square. It's nice to look at. We had some other people nice to look at waiting for us up in the studio. Sir Gerald Nabarro and Lord Boothby sitting together and facing Cliff Mitchell.
Gerald Nabarro nudging Lord Boothby to tell him that we're about to start to talk. Now, both of you are political animals. You both fought a great number of elections. Did you have a feeling in your bones that this is the way this election would go?
No, I didn't. I shall lose a lot of money tomorrow morning if Wilson and his crowd get in. I thought the Tories would win.
Lord Boothby?
Well, I never had any doubt. I thought the Labour Party would win with a workable majority, no more than that.
One of the most noticeable things about this election is the way that there's been a tremendous swing against the ministers, as Robin Day was saying. Now,
that gives me nothing but pleasure. I think ministers really should be bashed. And with one or two exceptions they have been. I'm sure it would be invidious to name them, but I think that the ministers have copped it, and I think they deserve to cop it.
So, Gerald, you've been a great basher of your own ministers.
Well, the Chancellor of the Exchequer's got back. No, I don't think that's quite fair, Bob. Ministers obviously bear the brunt of all the public opprobrium and so on in a general election, and they've gone down badly this time. But I personally don't think that it's absolutely certain that Wilson's in tomorrow. I think the margin is still quite narrow.
I don't think there's any doubt at all.
Well, how much of a working majority would the Labour people need, in your opinion, to actually work Parliament?
A workable majority, in my judgment, is certainly 30 seats. Yes, but they haven't got many more than
it would do.
The other thing, of course, that's been noticeable here is Patrick Gordon Walker losing at Smethwick. Now, have either of you any comment to make about that? Lord Boothby.
I think it's the most disgusting thing that's ever happened in British politics, certainly in our time, and probably for the last 200 years. It's revolting, Smethwick. It's a disgusting thing, and we should all be ashamed of it. It was a racial fight in the worst American traditions.
Sir Gerald?
Well, I think I'm much too close to the event to make a comment as strong as that. I know Smethwick very well. My old constituency, Kidderminster, was almost next door. Yeah. And, for example, in Perry Bar, the Conservatives won a seat from Labour where there is no racial problem. And I think if you examine these results tomorrow in the Birmingham area, where there is the greatest prosperity in the whole of Britain, you'll arrive at the conclusion that the swing against the Conservative Party is least of all in those highly prosperous districts.
All right, man, let me put a point to Sir Gerald here, because you're very much concerned, aren't you, with the constituencies around Merseyside. I mean,
The result in Merseyside has been a disaster for the Conservative Party. And it is significant so far, though we're all very close to the results, it is significant so far that in those areas of the country where we've been through periods of extremely high unemployment, for example on Merseyside, for example in the northeast, I've no doubt on Clydebank as well, the results are swinging most heavily against the Conservatives, although the government's done its best to import new industries into those areas.
May I ask you just one question?
Very briefly.
Where was the phrase coined, if you want a nigger for neighbour, vote for Labour?
Birmingham, Alabama.
Gerald, thank you very much. Lord Boothby, thank you.
Now let's take the state of the parties from Bob Mackenzie.
Well, clearly over half seats in now, with the Labour lead at 69. That's likely to be rather less when their majority is finally in tomorrow afternoon. If you look at the state of the parties, now the 44 Conservative losses, at the very point that if it stands like that, they'll wipe out their position. It now remains for Labour to push that higher if they can. I'd like to add one further point on this about the size of majority required for a government to rule successfully. I almost fell off my chair when I heard Bob Boothby, who's been in Parliament for God knows how many years before he went to the Lords, and Gerald Nabarro saying it required 30. Have they forgotten that the Conservatives ruled perfectly well with 17 between 1951 and 55? Many people would say they ruled better with 17 than they did with 100. I don't understand why they said it would require a 30 majority.
We have news. Mr. John Diamond is back in Gloucester for Labour. No change. In Altrincham Sale, Mr. Frederick Errol, Conservative Minister, of course, is safely back.
5.4% swing there, very high Liberal vote, 25% of the vote for the Liberals, 7.6% increase on last time.
In Rhondda West, Mr. Thomas is back for Labour.
And the Conservative lost his deposit, as did the Welsh Nationalist.
In Leicester South East, we have the Conservative safely back. There's no change there. Ealing South, the Conservatives have held against Mr. Jaffe. Sheffield Attercliffe, Mr. Hind, Labour has held, no change of the seat there.
Lost Liberal deposit there.
Yes. London Hackney Central, Mr. Butler for Labour has a large majority, has held the seat. In Colchester, Conservatives have held the seat with no change.
Yes.
In Sowerby, Mr. Houghton, that's Mr. Douglas Houghton, the Labour taxation expert, has held the seat for Labour.
He's sure to get a senior post in a Wilson cabinet.
2% swing in Sowerby.
Bournemouth West, Mr. Eden, that is the nephew of Sir Anthony Eden as was, Viscount Avon, has held the seat for the Conservatives, as one would expect. Enfield East, we have the Labour holding the seat, but no change. Results, we're getting them in thick and fast now. In Maidstone, the Conservatives hold the seat.
Biggish Liberal vote there.
Nottingham South, Clark for the Conservatives has a fairly narrow majority over Labour. The seat is held for the Conservatives.
Swing like the other Nottingham seats, not enough to unseat Mr. Clark.
Dundee West, Labour has held Dundee West.
Won by them in the by-election last year, a considerable swing compared to 59. This was Mr. Strachey's old seat, which he won in 59 and held till his death last year.
In Wells, the seat has been held for the Conservatives. There's no change down in that lovely cathedral town.
Again, a rather large Liberal vote.
Frank Commander Maitland, the junior minister.
Sunderland North, Mr. Fred Willey for Labour has held the seat. There's no change there.
He's one of the main education spokesmen. He'll have obviously some post in a Wilson government.
We continue giving you as many results as we can carry. Mr. Miss Campbell for the Conservatives has held Blackpool North, which contains a good deal of the middle of the town as well, incidentally, for the Conservatives.
This is a great recovery on the by-election, which they held the day before Orpington, when the Conservatives only won it by 900 votes from the Liberals. The Liberals have still kept second place in Blackpool North.
Now let's for a moment bring in Bob Mackenzie again.
Let's look at the fate of some famous names now. On the first board, we'll get well-known Labour people who are back. Michael Foot. Personally, I'll be fascinated to see whether he's offered a job if Labour forms a government, because he's been one of the most vigorous critics of all governments in his day. George Brown, the deputy leader, is of course comfortably back and is headed for a post in economic affairs if the government is formed. Dennis Healey, leading spokesman on defence affairs, and George Wigg, one of very colourful Labour backbenchers. Then the fate of the Liberals. Two well-known ones back. First of all, Jeremy Thorpe with a very successful win in the West Country, and Eric Lubbock in one of the hardest-fought campaigns, the Orpington one. Then two Liberal losses, Donald Wade and Arthur Holt. A very serious blow when the party had only 7 MPs to lose 2 of them. Then some government spokesmen who are out. Reginald Bevins, Postmaster General, Geoffrey Rippon, Minister of Works, Barber, Mr. Barber, the Minister of Health in Doncaster, and of course a Labour loss, Patrick Gordon Walker at Smethwick. Labour people back include Barbara Castle. Again, Wilson would almost certainly, one suspects, have her in a government as one of the feminine ministers. Charles Pannell could well be Minister of Works. Kenneth Robinson, headed for health in a Wilson government, an exceedingly able backbencher over recent years. And of course Roy Jenkins, close associate of the late Hugh Gateskill, and undoubtedly one of the ablest minds in the field of economics in the Labour Party. That's the picture at the moment.
Now let's take Ince. I hope it is Ince. I can never remember. Ince has been held for Labour by Mr. Maguire.
A very safe seat.
Safe seat, says Mr. Butler. After Ince, we have Motherwell in Scotland, which Labour has also held in the shape of Mr. Lawson.
There as elsewhere, the communist vote has gone up, very slightly, but it has gone up. In almost every seat the communists have fought, it's gone up on 59, but still, everyone has lost his deposit so far.
We have Belfast East with a fair-sized majority for the Ulster Unionist candidate, in other words, the Conservative.
The first Ulster seat we've had.
Oldham West has been held by Mr. Hale for Labour.
3.8% swing.
Leslie Hale is the fastest talker in the House of Commons. Nightmare for the shorthand reporters.
North Wales to Anglesey, which has been held for Labour with no change.
Megan Lloyd George's old seat, the Liberals now a fairly bad third.
Hughes and 3 Joneses. Last time it was 3 Hugheses and 1 Jones, I seem to remember. That's what happens in Wales. London Woolwich East. Christopher Mayhew for Labour has held the seat, well-known television artist and also former minister.
And prospective substantially up.
Kingston upon Hull East. Mr. Percy for Labour has held the seat. Let us take Finchley in London, which Mrs. Thatcher has held for the Conservatives. Fairly predictable, I think.
The Liberals came second. They very much hoped to win this. It was one they had got a majority in local government elections on.
Batley and Morley, the twin towns, or near each other towns, which make up a constituency, held by Labour. No change. We can take Portsmouth Langston, the top end of Portsmouth Harbour, which the Conservatives have held with a 9,800 majority.
Down quite a lot.
Let's take Belfast West from Northern Ireland, another Ulster Unionist majority for the Conservatives.
If the Conservatives were to lose a seat in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, this would probably have been the seat. They've held it very comfortably, although they are on a minority vote this time, a substantial minority vote.
So, we're back again in the studio for a moment, and we go up on the platform to Robin Day.
And with me, Quintin Hogg, returned for the London seat of Marylebone, and one of the 2 men who, according to all observers, really livened up the campaign. First, Mr. Hogg, your own result. What is your comment on that?
Oh, I think it was perfectly satisfactory, but it wasn't in any way dramatic. I didn't reach my target of 10, but I was very much improved on the by-election of 5.
Would you like to comment on the general trend? Our experts here appear to think that there's little doubt that Mr. Wilson will be called on to form the new government.
Well, I've just come from a count, and I've no doubt if what you say is true, that is true, but I really don't know what's happened at all.
But assuming that this is probably so, would you care to take back your remark about people being stark staring bonkers? Because there seem to be quite a lot of people who would fall into that category.
I didn't say that people would. I said that the British public, if it fell for socialism again, would be stark staring bonkers.
What is the distinction between people who've fallen for socialism and people who voted Labour?
I don't talk about individuals at all.
But you talked about some 13 million individuals.
I didn't talk about 13 million. I said that that's what would be the case.
What is your reaction to the apparent, so far, the results so far, that ministers seem to have done badly, some of them? Mr. Marple's majority came down. Mr. Henry Brooks came down savagely in Hampstead.
I don't know about individual results at all. My own guess is that you could explain all the individual results if you knew enough about the general trends. I'm afraid, I'm very sorry to have to say this, because I think individuals should count.
Yes.
But I think that they don't count a great deal in general elections. I think it's general trends which count.
Do you think the Conservative Party made any mistakes in its campaign, or was it the victim of an inevitable trend or a general trend?
Well, it's too early to say that yet. I think that it had to face a number of very considerable initial difficulties, and if it doesn't pull it off, it means it didn't overcome them. But that doesn't necessarily mean a defect in generalship. On the other hand, it doesn't exclude it.
Do you think that there is the possibility of a new argument or discussion about leadership in the Conservative Party if they lose?
I don't see why one should turn on one's leader just because one loses an election.
Would you like to comment on the result at Smethwick, Mr. Hogg? And I think it's fair to tell you that Mr. Ray Gunter, not long ago, said that any decent Conservative should be ashamed of that result, in which Mr. Gordon Walker lost his seat.
I'm afraid I have no comments to make. I know nothing about the result of Smethwick.
Well, I'm telling you the result, Mr. Hogg. I'm sorry, I thought you knew. In fact, Mr. Gordon Walker lost his seat to Mr. Peter Griffiths, the Conservative candidate.
I see no reason why anyone should be ashamed of Mr. Gordon Walker losing his seat. Happens to us all at some time in our political career.
I think the point is that the Conservative candidate there fought on what was regarded as being a policy contrary to the non-racial policy of the Conservative Prime Minister.
Well, I should have to see what he'd said before I commented upon it. I'm afraid I've been very highly occupied this campaign, and I didn't speak at Smethwick.
May I ask you, turn away from our election for one moment, Mr. Hogg, and ask you what you think about the news that Mr. Khrushchev, whom you met last year in Moscow, has been relieved of his post.
Well, I don't know what to make of it yet. I've heard the news, and I must say I formed, like most people who met him, rather an affection for Mr. Khrushchev.
Why?
His dynamic, rumbustious personality, a fascinating man.
Did you find that you were a similar type to yourself? He was a similar type to yourself in many ways?
I'm not sure that anyone is quite similar to him.
Anyway, you've got something else in common with him tonight, perhaps.
I don't think I've got anything in common with him tonight.
Well, you may be out of office. Thank you very much, Mr. Hogg.
I don't think so.
Now let's go to Bob Mackenzie and the state of the parties.
Labour lead now of 71 over the Conservatives, with well over half the results in, something like 3/5 of the results in, at 121. If we look at the position of the parties now, we see that the Tories have got to the Labour Party has got to the point that I said earlier in the evening they had to get to. That is 45 Tory losses on the evening, although Labour itself has lost 3, so this gets them, as it were, a net gain from the Tories of 42. Now, there are about 4 or 5 more marginal seats to come tonight. It's going to be a very tough race. I don't detract in any way from the earlier view that the thing is going Labour, but it's going to be a very tough, close race. And tomorrow, there aren't all that many marginal seats to come in the results. So that we still, I think, can look to a Labour majority, but not a great one.
We have Mr. Benn returned to Parliament, just this moment come in. Here's his majority.
Substantial increase in his majority compared to 1959, drop from the by-election.
This is the 4th election, of course, they've had in this constituency because of Mr. Benn's efforts to avoid going into the House of Lords, which he succeeded in doing, and he will now be in a Labour government if there is going to be one.
The Tories are in again at Blackpool South with Mr. Blaker.
But a big drop in majority there. Mr. Blaker coming as a new man just from the Foreign Office, taking the place of Sir Roland Robinson.
In Norwich North, we have another Labour MP, Mr. Wallace, in a Labour seat since 1950 when it was created.
He moved up from Norwich South, where he fought unsuccessfully against Mr. Rippon last time. He'd have won if he'd stayed in Norwich South.
But he was an MP before then for Chislehurst, got beaten by Pat Hornsby.
In London Lewisham South, Mr. Carroll Johnson, one of the backroom boys of the Labour Party, I believe, has held the seat for Labour.
He succeeded Herbert Morrison. That was Herbert Morrison's old seat.
Dundee East, Labour have held without a change with Mr. George Thompson.
Increased majority there.
Another Scottish result from Edinburgh Leith, the seaport of Edinburgh, which Labour have held without a change. Mr. James Hoy. Walthamstow East, the Conservatives have held just.
No, Conservatives have held. It's a remarkable result, Walthamstow East. Only a 3.5% swing, but it's one of those that was on the margin that they've saved.
We have Poole in Dorset. Mr. Merton for the Conservatives has held Poole, the 2nd biggest natural harbour in the world, if you like facts.
A very big Liberal vote there in Poole.
Big harbour. Glasgow Govan. Mr. Rankin for the Labour Co-op has the seat comfortably in hand. Esher in Surrey, Sir William Robson Brown has held a very Conservative seat in what mustn't be called a dormitory because it makes them cross. London Norwood has been held just for the Conservatives.
But this is a very surprisingly big swing for Labour. It's next door to some other seats. It was held by Labour 45 to 50, but it wasn't thought to be one of those marginals that was really in any danger of falling. It seems to be nearer the margin than people expected. The Liberal loses his deposit.
Sir Jackie Smythe is the MP.
In Harrow West, the Conservatives have retained the seat. In Glasgow Scotstoun, is it a Scotstoun? The seat has been held equally by Labour.
Big swing to Labour there. There is an extra big swing to Labour throughout Scotland.
We have Kingston upon Hull West, which Labour has held with a 6,000 majority.
This is a new member succeeding Captain Mark Hewitson.
We have Worthing, where Conservatives equally, I think, predictably, have got the seat with a comfortable majority.
Very good result for the Liberals here. They're coming 2nd.
Now let's, from the studio, go up and join Cliff Mitchellmore.
Where I've got George Woodcock and Mr. Frank Cousins. Now, the commentators have been making a great deal of play in the past couple of hours about the fact that some of these strikes, particularly in London, have had an effect on the voting, and they've swung the vote against Labour. Now, how far do you think this is true, Mr. Cousins?
Well, I think there's probably some slight effect in some of the marginal constituencies in London and the inner London area, because this was where the effect of it was felt. But I would have thought that if you look at the general pattern of suburban London, the change has not been so great as to say that the seats might have been won simply had there not have been a strike. So that I would not think it was a decisive feature. It may have been one of a number of things. I would have thought that the final thing that happened in London was that there was a very heavy rain in the last couple of hours when most of our those who've been at work during the day, supporters come out, and it may just have had the tipping of the balance by it raining, and we can't be responsible for the rain.
Mr. Woodcock?
I don't think that any strike, including this strike, could possibly have any but the very slightest effect upon the number of votes or the way people voted. In any case, if it does, I'm afraid that is just too bad.
We now look like having a Labour government, so both of you must be very seriously thinking about your relations with this government. How far will you support now that you have a Labour government a complete review of the trade union structure and their attitude towards the government and their attitude towards an incomes policy? Mr. Woodcock?
Well, structure is our concern. I don't see that it's got anything at all to do with the government. And frankly, to any government, my advice is to leave structure entirely to us.
But incomes
policy, incomes planning, or incomes policy, call it what you will, that is a matter in which the government has a very deep and abiding interest. That is true. But I think I should put it this way, that a good deal of the initiative in this field must come from the government itself. We are not likely to take any initiative, and we will look with extraordinary care on any proposals that are put forward. We'll have to see how far they are compatible with the essential functions of trade unionism. Now, I don't know what proposals the government will put forward. They've talked generally, but if they're the government, they'll have to talk solid current coin of the realm, not just general talk.
I think there are some things in which it's quite true the government will need to look, but it's not on structure of trade unions or behaviour of trade unions. It may be on the whole problem of industrial relationship itself. Because one of the things that's happened in the past few years, the Conservatives have deliberately destroyed the attitude of relationship and the build-up of arbitration procedures and conciliation in British industry that we'd so painstakingly worked for over 50 or 60 years of genuine trade union effort to get solutions by discussion. You see, they did away with the National Arbitration Tribunal. They instituted instead National Incomes Commission, a body that brought into contempt their examination of matters of wage costings. And they themselves have put it to the stage where the need will be for the Labour government to restore confidence in the whole principles of arbitration.
All right. If you were the Minister of Labour, how would you set about doing this, the pair of you?
Well, I know
Let me ask you first, and then
I would set about it first. I would start talking with the TUC on terms of equality and not telling them what a government felt the TUC ought to do, which is what this government has attempted to do to us, particularly during the past 5 years.
Well, you are the TUC, Mr. Woodcock, or you're the voice of the TUC tonight.
But I'm not proposing to be the Minister of Labour. He must work out his own salvation.
But he should work out his own salvation with you, Mr. Woodcock.
Yes, well, we are prepared, and I think this can be said with confidence, to respond to anything that is reasonable, sensible, and practicable. But as Frank says, we cannot possibly simply be told, and I don't care who the government is, whether it's Labour or Conservative, we cannot be told that we have to do this kind of thing. You see, governments tend to say, and I understand their view, and I sympathise with them, that they are the custodians of the public interest. Well, as Shakespeare said, in sort of limitation, we have an interest too.
Mr. Woodcock, Mr. Cousins, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
News that in Eton and Slough, Fenner Brockway has been beaten. The seat has gone to the Conservatives, to Sir Anthony Mayor, by that tiny majority of 11.
The majority was under 100 last time. It's a very small swing, that. On the other hand, it does introduce the racial element again. Here was a place where there was a racial issue, not that Sir Anthony Mayor exploited it at all, but there is sign that this issue has counted for rather more than one would like to see in quite a lot of places.
Offset by Midland gain, Labour gain in the Midlands at Wellingborough.
But a very small swing there, only about 1%
That's Michael Hamilton, who
swing
won the seat off Labour in 1959. He's defending it again, but he just lost it.
So with that gain at Wellingborough for Labour, Mr. Howarth, we now go to Robert Mackenzie.
I'd like to make the point that this is turning out still to be a very tough race. Labour is still by far the favourites to win it, but if you look at the forecast board, you'll see what I mean. Just over the necessary 3.5% swing to Labour, pointing to a Labour majority of 26 seats, but that is over the Conservatives. Now, if the Liberals come back with, say, 6 or 7, that cuts in again on that Labour lead, and they might have a majority very, very similar indeed to the one the Tories had in 1951. That was a majority of 17. And this is based on the assumption that the Labour Party wins tonight 7 more marginals, which should fall to a four-point swing. But you must keep in mind that you do get exceptions to this, and Labour has no margin to play around with at all in this present situation. And it also assumes that 12 more seats tomorrow, which are marginal, would fall to a 4-point swing, will go to Labour. And there's very little margin in it for Labour, though they're still ahead. If you look at the total votes, you'll see how they're being shared. Conservatives getting 42% so far, against 49% at the last election. But that will go up, presumably tomorrow, when the rural votes and others come in. Labour is running at 46%, at 46.5 against 44 at the last election. By no means a big, massive change of opinion, clearly, when you look at that. The Liberals doing rather better, but with more candidates at 10% against 6% last time. Turnout is down a little, which is surprising in a way. Perhaps the campaign was too long. Then the party horse race. Here you'll see Conservatives 150, Labour 225. Now this, of course, as I've stressed, is very misleading because in the results tomorrow, the Conservatives will pick up very considerably indeed. And therefore one mustn't be left with the impression that this represents a tremendous sweeping Labour victory at this stage. It's a narrow Labour win indicated, but Labour must perform efficiently all the way tomorrow. It cannot afford to lose more than 5 of the seats that it ought to be winning unless it is going to be in real trouble. So I want to emphasize the fact that the game isn't wholly over.
Here's news that Christopher Chataway has run in just first in London Lewisham North. Very much reduced majority, but he's held it for the Conservatives.
The majority last time was 4,500. But North Lewisham has got a very floating population. It's estimated that about 2/3 of the people here were voting in North Lewisham for the first time.
In Sheffield, Brightside, Mr. Winterbottom, as a trade union national officer, has held the seat for Labour with a majority, as you see, of over 17,000. There's Mr. Leo Absey in Pontypool holding the seat for Labour. He's the man who on special occasions in Parliament dresses up more magnificently than anybody else. There's Hamilton. That's held for Labour by Mr. Fraser with a very large majority.
He's the Shadow Minister of Power.
Bromley, Mr. Harold Macmillan's former seat with a large number of competitors, held for the Conservatives, as you see.
A very big Liberal vote, a 5.4% swing, a little bit of an average again, rather a blow to those who believe in a personal vote. For Mr. Macmillan's successor seems to have done about as well as one might have expected Mr. Macmillan to do.
Walthamstow West in London gives us Labour holding the seat. Mr. Redhead, no change. Glasgow Maryhill, predictably, has a large Labour majority and has been kept by Labour.
Anti-vivisectionist got 1,000 votes there.
We'll go to Liverpool now and join Harold Webb.
Well, I stood outside the Adelphi Hotel. I've never...
Oh, this is a picture. I just realised what this is. It's Mr. Harold Wilson in his car just arriving at his hotel in Liverpool. Feeling, I should think, pretty tired, but pretty happy. There's a little tiny smile through the window for those who are cheering him in the street. A nice little unexpected snapshot to drop into our election report. Incidentally, the bookmakers have now stopped taking any bets except on how big the Labour majority will be. I was informed quite a long time ago and haven't had time to mention it until now. So, there we watch Mr. Wilson, placid and still. Is he going so slowly because they're having to push a way through a crowd for him? I think somehow they are, although we can't see the crowd round the car.
Returning, I understand, by train sometime in the morning.
His car is now coming up towards the Adelphi, returning in triumph to the hotel from which he has run this campaign during the past 3 or 4 days. Here comes Mr. Wilson now, his car bedecked in Labour's colours of red and white. Mr. Wilson, you returned to the hotel. You left as Mr. Wilson, the Labour candidate for Huyton. You look as if you're returning as the next Prime Minister. How do you feel?
I've returned as the MP for Huyton with a majority 3 times as big, and I'm very pleased about that.
What about the way the campaign is going in the country generally?
Well, I described it on BBC television a few minutes ago as moderately encouraging, and I don't want to withdraw that remark.
Do you think you're going to have an adequate working majority as things go at the moment?
I'll tell you when all the votes are counted, when they've announced the results.
Well, now that you're going into your hotel, what are you going to do now? You're going off to bed?
No, I think I'll listen to the results a little longer. Then I'll go to bed.
Are we likely to hear any further statement from you tonight?
I should think it's most unlikely.
Thank you very much. How do you feel, Mrs. Wilson, about it all?
Very excited and a little bit tired, but very thrilled.
Did you expect the country to go like this yourself?
I didn't really know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. We shan't keep you any longer.
Well, back in London, Mr. Wilson playing it cool and constitutional. Let's now go to Mackenzie for the state of the parties.
There we got the Labour lead over the Conservatives, 74. Somewhat deceptive figure, as I said, because their majority will be nothing remotely resembling that. And the results now in, we're getting through most of them now tonight. 2/3 in all are to come in tonight, but there's not likely to be any sensational results, except perhaps another 5 or 6 critical marginals. If we look at the party lead board, but a slowing down of Conservative losses over the last little while, partly because of the slowing down of results, but Labour Party's got to watch it over the rest of the time. It looks like a 1951 situation where the winning side got a majority of 17, but it just could turn into one of those awful 1950 situations where we didn't know till late on the next day how it went. But I would still stand with the view that Labour ought to have a majority over the other parties of something between 15 and 20, perhaps a little more.
With the smallest majority of the night, the Conservatives have held Reading with Mr. Peter Emery by just 10 votes.
A 4% swing in Reading.
This is a seat which Mr. Emery took off Mr. Mercado at the last election. It's regarded as a very typical town.
Mr. Fred Blackburn holds Stalybridge and Hyde for Labour.
A slightly increased majority, but not as big a swing as in that part of the country.
These are the Cheshire cotton towns, isn't it? Let's take Nantwich now as a famous place. Salt and all sorts of other things. Wing Commander Grant Ferris has held it for the Conservatives.
Fairly big Liberal vote there.
But not much swing.
Let's have Aberdeen North, which has been held by Mr. Hughes, well-known Labour man.
That's Mr.
Safest
Hector Hughes.
seat in the north of Scotland.
Hector Hughes holds Aberdeen. We take Northwich. In Northwich, the Conservatives have held the seat with a modest majority.
Sir John Foster, who sat there since 1945 when he got in with a majority of 15. It's up on that at least.
Wednesbury, Labour and Co-op with Mr. Stonehouse, a well-known Member of Parliament, holding the seat for Labour Co-op.
A swing to Labour, a swing to the Conservatives there in that Black Country area. It isn't just Smethwick on the racial issue. It does seem that area is moving slightly towards the Conservatives. We've had a similar result in Oldbury and Halesowen, next door to that.
Greenock on the Clyde has been held for Labour Co-op. There's no change up there on the waterway.
The Conservatives come third yet again.
That's Dr. Dixon Mabon. Wallsend, Labour are holding with Mr. Garrett. No change in Wallsend, another Labour MP. No comments on Wallsend, docks, turbines and coal. Feltham in Middlesex is in with Labour holding it, yes, in the shape of Mr. Hunter.
Not much swing there. It has been interesting, right along the district line, right through London, or London outskirts, the swing has been appreciably less than in other seats in the London area.
No, that's not the district line, that's the Southern Railway, but never mind. South Shields has been held for Labour with no change by Mr. Blenkinsop.
This was Shooter Reed's old seat. Arthur Blenkinsop lost to Newcastle at the last election. Now he's come back and he may well be in the government.
Glasgow Springburn, Labour is held by Mr. Buchanan against 3 comers.
2 lost deposits there.
We now take London Lewisham West. Conservatives have held the seat with a narrow majority.
This is a fairly big swing in Lewisham West.
It's a new member standing, new Conservative candidate. The old member stood down.
Let us now join Robin Day, who's about to talk to the red-headed Miss Barbara Castle in Manchester, and sitting at her side the not-so-red-headed Mr. Tony Greenwood.
Good evening. How very cool and elegant you both look. May I just remind Mrs. Barbara Castle of your success at Blackburn. Your majority went up to 6,896, correct?
That's so.
And Tony Greenwood at Rossendale, you went up to 3,141.
Quite true.
Good. Some people may have forgotten the details in the flood of results. How do you see things turning out now? What majority do you forecast?
Well, I think things are going very well at the moment. I expect that we shall get a majority. It's difficult at this stage to see what it is, but I've no doubt your computer is about right, and it looks as though we are going to have a working majority, although perhaps not as big a majority as one would have liked to have had.
Mrs. Barbara Castle, do you regard between 15 and 20, which was Bob Mackenzie's last estimate, as a working majority?
Well, may I begin by apologising for my voice? I've been campaigning in the open air in the rain. I think 15 is a working majority, though obviously not an easy one. We could carry through many profound changes and revitalise the country, even on 15. But I hope and believe it'll be at least 30.
May I put one more question to you, which you can save your voice by answering yes or no to? Would you like a post in Mr. Wilson's cabinet?
Yes, please.
Your voice sound reminds me of Miss Lorraine Bacall. I shouldn't worry too much. Tony Greenwood, what do you think will happen about the position of Foreign Secretary in a Labour government now that Mr. Gordon Walker has lost his seat?
I don't think it need affect the position at all. I think the Smethwick result is quite disgraceful, and I hope that the Labour Party will show its disapproval of the decision of the electors of Smethwick by seeing that Mr. Gordon Walker's position is not at all affected by the vote that they have given.
I got the impression that this was what Mr. Wilson meant in the interview he gave just after the result at Highton, that I interpret this as meaning that he would get whatever post he would have got anyway, despite this result, and a safe seat be found for him. That's what you mean, is it?
Well, I haven't seen the interview, but Mr. Wilson and I often see eye to eye.
Ah. And now let me ask you about that. What do you think is the future of the left wing, of which you are a leading member, under Mr. Wilson's administration, if he forms one?
We are a united party. I don't think this is an occasion to talk about left wings or right wings or centres. The important thing now is working to strengthen the Labour government, and that means that all of us have got to work as a team, as we've been doing for the last couple of years or so.
Well, it may not be the occasion for you to wish to talk about it, Mr. Greenwood, but I hope you won't mind my asking questions about it. Thank you very...
You're a Liberal and you're entitled to.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Greenwood, for answering my questions. And I'm sorry to have strained your voice, Mrs. Barbara Castle.
Here is the state of the parties. We can show it to you quite clearly. Conservatives 160, Labour 230, and lo and behold, that is not here in the studio, but in Trafalgar Square. We join Alan Wicker out there.
Getting on for 1:45, and still many thousands of people here in Trafalgar Square. Quite a serious audience at the moment watching the BBC election screen. On the other side of the square, possibly a less serious group. They've been following the activities of the swimmers in the fountains. The police have tended to leave them alone, but one officer just told me that as they come down from the fountain, they're going to be, as he said, nicked. Alan Wicker, Trafalgar Square.
I've just been told, by the way, a lot of people have been telephoning us to ask why we have not been interviewing recently Sir Alec Douglas Hume. The answer to that is I've just been informed that he is watching this very programme inside number 10 Downing Street. That's an excellent reason why he can't be here with us now. David Butler.
We've been looking into the figures on the coloured vote issue. And if you check through, it does seem that if you look at all the constituencies where the coloured vote, where the coloured or anti-coloured vote might have been an issue, the swing was, on the whole, rather more favourable to the Conservatives. Labour did do rather well in Handsworth, but in all Birmingham, All Saints, Birmingham, Sparkbrook, this was below the average. In East Bradford, rather below the average for Yorkshire. And then there were two racialist candidates who actually fought on a racialist platform in Deptford and in Southall, and one got 9%, one got 8.5%. No other independents who were unbacked by any major force got more than 2 or 3% of the vote. And so this, coupled with the swing in Smethwick, this remarkable 7% swing, there's been nothing else remotely like this towards the Conservatives, does suggest that the racial issue has some very alarming dynamite in it from the political point of view. I'm sure we're going to hear a great deal more about that in the post-mortems on this election.
The Conservatives have held Bristol North West with Mr. Martin McLaren, the barrister.
Mr. McLaren won this seat off Labour in 1959. It only needed a swing of 2%, well below what their average, for Labour to get it, and they haven't done so, which is a very good result for the Conservatives.
A 1% swing there. It does mean that Bristol North East, which is one of the only two marginals we're still waiting for, three marginals we're still waiting for this evening, looks as though it might well be held by the Conservatives on this form. Gravesend and West Renfrew, I think, and Eastleigh are the only other results, and possibly Berwick and East Lothian we're expecting tonight, which look like showing a change between Conservative and Labour.
The Conservatives have held with Sir John Barlow, Middleton and Prestwich. Here are the figures for you.
An 8% swing there.
In Glasgow in the Gorbals, which used to be a slum and is now rapidly being converted and redesigned, we have Mrs. Alice Cullen holding the seat for Labour. A new future for the Gorbals. I'm not talking politically, but in terms of housing. We have Belfast South in with another of those whacking great Ulster Unionist figures.
And two hopelessly lost deposits at the bottom of the table.
Portsmouth West is now in. Conservatives hold it pretty narrowly.
This was the one seat in Portsmouth that Labour hoped to win. There was a recount there, and there was a pretty big swing, but not enough to put Labour in.
We have Coatbridge and Airdrie, surely spinning areas, if my memory serves me rightly, which are held by Labour. Barrow-in-Furness, Walter Monslow, it stays Labour with him, former engine driver, incidentally. Here's the fact that Labour has kept Edinburgh East, the majority, 5,500, that's Mr. Eustace Willis has held the seat.
It's a seat which could very easily have gone. It only needed a swing of under 0.5% to the Conservatives, but
here
at the moment it's not going to the right.
Here is Runcorn. We won't talk about the Transporter Bridge, for once held by the Conservatives against all comers. Now let's take, I think it's time, yes, the state of the parties from Bob Mackenzie.
Well, here we've got the position at 148. This is now becoming very misleading. You see, you get Labour lead over the Conservatives of 70, but that's going to be tremendously whittled away when the rural and small town results come in tomorrow. It still looks, obviously, to all of us here, I think, that the Labour Party will get by with a majority, but whether it's going to be 20 or 15 or 12 is now an open question. Could it be somewhere in there? Could we look at the position on the state of the parties? You see, the Labour Party, it's true, has knocked out the 45 they needed to on the Conservatives tonight, but they've lost 4 themselves, so it puts the thing back in a rather tighter position. I've been looking through, as a matter of fact, the position regarding the seats they ought to be winning on a 4% swing, and I find that in the last half hour there are 3 they should have taken on a 4% swing. Bristol North West, Reading, and Walthamstow East. Now, they failed to get those. This is the kind of thing that in this very, very neck-and-neck situation that's maybe shaping up, the Labour can't afford to have happen. There are 12 marginals due to fall tomorrow, a very small number due to fall tomorrow on a 4% swing. Now, if the Tories save many of them, we could be in a position where Labour would not have a clear working majority.
Here we have a result from Bristol Central. That's a Labour MP, and for Bristol Central again, Labour Co-op, rather.
It's very interesting there, the swing to Labour. There is a quite appreciable swing to Labour in Bristol Central, not a very big one, but there was a great row this week and over the last few weeks on schools in Bristol Central against the proposals of the Labour Council there. It was expected the swing would be worse than average in Bristol. The Conservatives held Bristol North West. It's touch and go on Bristol North East.
Sir Henry Davidor Goldschmidt is back in Walsall South for the Conservatives,
with a very good majority, hardly any swing against him in this black country area.
Labour's held Huddersfield East with Mr. JPW, or otherwise Curly Maladew, a very well-known Member of Parliament.
This was the one seat in Huddersfield and Bolton which didn't fall to the Conservative and Liberal pact. Mr. Marylew's held this ever since the war.
And back in London, Wembley South remains with the Conservatives. There's no change there. In Scotland, Glasgow Creighton, Bruce Millen holds the seat for Labour.
An 8% swing there, 81% turnout, much bigger than most places in Scotland and indeed in England. The turnout overall is about 75%, the lowest in any post-war, post-1945 election.
Back to Croydon, London, Croydon South to be exact, with a not very big Conservative majority where they've held the seat, Mr. Richard Thompson. Spelthorne in Middlesex, the Conservatives have held, with a majority, 5,500 odd. Cheadle.
Here's a quite remarkable Liberal vote. You see nearly twice as many votes as Labour, a very good second, over 30% of the vote for the Liberal candidate in Cheadle.
Now that man about town of ours you met hours ago earlier this evening, who's been visiting the election parties around London, I said I hoped he'd return in good shape. He appears to be in moderately good shape from what I can see. Over then to David Frost.
Moderately good shape, though not quite as slimline as Richard. The activity at one of the more influential and enjoyable of London's parties at the Savoy tonight has been absolutely frantic. Columnists have been rapidly cancelling stories that they've got exclusives on for Sunday about how there are as many old Etonian lunatics in a lunatic asylum as in Surrey as there was going to be in a new Conservative cabinet. That's gone by the board. Rapidly, ex-Tory advisers or Tory ex-advisers are offering their memoirs to the assorted publishers gathered among the audience at the Savoy. Earlier this evening, before any of the results came along, one cabinet minister said to me that he really did, one ex-cabinet minister perhaps, said that he really hated the whole idea of elections, and he wished that things were run here as they were in a part of South America that someone had told him about. The person had said that what happens there is that, well, to quote the man, he'd said, well, we arrange the elections, you see, so that each time we win. We always win, that's all arranged. But just in order to be democratic, every 4 years we reverse our policies. He must be hoping, that cabinet minister, that Harold Wilson doesn't take a hint from that. The biggest cheer of the evening that I've heard at any of the parties was that record swing against the Postmaster General in Liverpool, and one of the loudest shouters was unkind enough to suggest that the result proved that the personality of the candidate did play a part after all. The loudest groan of the evening at any of the parties undoubtedly went up when the result from Smethwick came through, where we learnt that instead of a shadow Foreign Secretary, the people of Smethwick preferred a shadow Governor Wallace. Why is it, a lot of people have been asking in their questions, that the Labour Party in a campaign in this country and the Democrats in America always seem to make all the jokes? And at the same time, they've been asking, why is it that the Conservatives in this country and the Republicans in America always seem to be accompanied by the more attractive ladies? The lack of wit has been much complained about before the results came through and after. People feel this has been a very unwitty campaign. The best they can think of from any of the candidates was Mr. Harold Wilson's description when he said, "Have you seen Lord Blakenham on television? Keep death off the roads." The best remark, people generally agree, of the whole campaign was from a heckler when Mr. Wilson said on one occasion, "Why do I emphasise the role and importance of the Royal Navy?" And the heckler shouted, "Because you're in Chatham." In general, however, what's being asked are just a whole set of questions of varying sorts. Will Harold Wilson's first act be to give an honour to Mr. Hill, Mr. Herbert Hill, for public and political services? Will Mr. George Brown have had such success in his whistle-stop tours that that's the job that he'll be given in a Labour government by Mr. Wilson? Will the Liberals tomorrow have to make their announcement that once again in this general election they really were quite happy because they've only been viewing the whole general election as a sort of rehearsal for the coming by-elections? And finally, will Mr. Wilson show the wit and style as he takes office that President Kennedy did when President Kennedy made that comment a few days later and said, when we got into office, the thing that surprised me was to find that things were just as bad as we'd been saying they were. Back to you.
Well, very nice. That puts the whole thing approximately in perspective and also gave us time to get some sandwiches and some coffee in the middle of this hugely busy studio. Let me think. We better have another look at the swing situation, and we will go to Bob Mackenzie.
Well, the pendulum is still around 4% swing, a little fluctuation. And the real problem now, from the Labour Party point of view, is there's no room for fluctuation at all. It's still pointing to a Labour lead of 23, but let me say again, that is over the Conservatives. And if the Liberal Party came back with 5, 6, 7 seats, that would cut into this lead overall and bring it down to the very dangerous teens rather than in the 20s. And in this situation, what makes it fascinating is that in the last half hour, I've been reckoning there are at least 3 seats which the swing required to win was less than 4%, and the Labour Party failed to get them. The seats were Bristol North West, Reading, Walthamstow East. Now, if that began to happen tomorrow, and I can reckon 12 seats tomorrow, which Labour ought to get on a 4% swing, if it failed to get any number of these, then the Labour Party is in really serious trouble. But as of this moment, it still points to a Labour win with just a working majority. But tomorrow's results now will not be of merely academic interest. They will, in fact, be of tremendous interest. And there'll be no saying, finally, the game is over until well into tomorrow.